like to call to order this meeting of the Edgewood Planning and Zoning Commission, November 19th, 2019. It's now 6:31 p.m. We're a little out of sequence because we're approaching holiday. We're doing a meeting a little bit early. So we're going to go ahead and do a roll call for those present. Commissioner Lee.
Present.
Commissioner Fox.
Present.
Commissioner Herrera.
Present.
And I'm here, Commissioner Felton. We're missing Commissioner Turner at this point, and we have an open seat that I assume the mayor will fill fairly soon, hopefully.
We have a few people interested.
Excellent. So that brings us to the second item on our agenda, which is approval of the agenda. Has everyone had a chance to look at that? Any changes that we need? Let me know. Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to go ahead and approve it, and we'll run through it.
I move that we approve the agenda for November 19th, 2019.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The motion passes. Item 3 is approval of the minutes from our last meeting, which was November 12th, 2019. I sent in a couple of corrections. I'm sorry I sent those kind of late in the game.
That's okay. They were good points.
So if there are other changes we have to make, let's go ahead and make them and see if we can get the draft minutes approved. Take a look at them, suggest changes, or I'll wait for a motion to approve. That is really odd.
It's the ghost.
It's like a phase problem.
You know, the craziest thing is when you watch the camera footage, isn't it like at 6:30 in the morning? So everything's in color. And you can see that throughout, any time that's tripped, which it usually isn't. But 6:30 in the morning, the council chamber light comes on, but it's gray. There's no color. And you don't see, it's just kind of like moving, like in Poltergeist, when, yeah. Every morning.
How long does it stay like that?
A couple of minutes.
Wow.
Well, this issue is why if I ever mic'd my drum set at all when I was playing a gig somewhere, it was always a single vocal mic 4 feet in front of the bass drum in a real strategic place or tucked in by my right armpit, between two drums. The more mics you have, the more possibility there is for things like
feedback,
driving each other crazy.
I'd like to ask a question about Mr. Eugene Barella.
Yeah.
You were very kind in your writing of the public comment there.
I have to give credit to Tim because I didn't have time to finish them before I left Friday. So he actually did the majority of the minutes.
Commenting on border issues and emergency planning really wasn't what he was talking about.
I know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it coming? It's not even on? Wow.
That little girl.
Yeah, it would have taken about
That's
14
crazy.
pages.
Yes.
Right.
Well,
And you have to write really slow, so, yeah.
well,
With it being off, yeah.
I don't
Unless there's
think
a
we
loose
should
wire somewhere.
put any disparaging remarks in there, but that was really not a good presentation.
No.
See if it goes away, it's a good idea.
He got his idea across, but
I,
it took, I
wonder if
it's my
transformer.
his ideas were
Charges.
filled full of.
Because I've got a full battery, I don't
Shotgun
have to have
holes.
this plugged in. That
He
might be it.
started talking about probabilistic risk assessment, of which I know just a little bit, and people at Homeland Security that are one of my best friends know a
Yeah.
little bit about. He was just not on target.
Yeah.
He was
Yeah.
incorrect about some of the things he was promising.
Yeah, probably better in writing.
Do you want a job doing scientific research? You're pretty good at this. We think it's my transformer from my computer, my AC adapter. It may be.
Yeah.
Is everybody done reading?
Yes.
I read them
Yeah,
I read 'em
a
had
couple of
them,
times
too.
at home.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the minutes of November 12th, 2019.
Okay, we have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
I second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Great. So the minutes, the draft minutes are approved. That brings us to item number 4, which is an action item. This is findings of fact and conclusions of law concerning the application of Good Shepherd Lutheran Church for a zone change of one lot from R1 residential to SU, which is, we decided the most appropriate designation. You don't need me to read the whole legal description, right?
Right.
Great, because it's painful. Okay. So I'll wait for a motion to go ahead and approve that.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we accept the action item, findings of fact and conclusions of law for the Good Shepherd Lutheran Church and its request for, I guess I got to get the right words in there. A zone change from R1 to SU.
Okay, we have a motion to accept this.
I motion to accept.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
I thought I
Okay.
made a motion to
Yeah.
accept.
We
Mr.
have-
Lee made that.
We have a
Yeah.
motion and a second on this first one. So all those in favor? Does this have to be roll call too?
It doesn't, but for clarification, he made the motion.
Right.
And then Stephanie's the second. Commissioner Herrera's the second.
I think, Steve, you were second on this one, weren't you?
So we had two motions is what
I
we
know,
had.
Stephanie was starting to make a motion on the next one.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Somebody just second.
And then I should twice second.
Okay,
2 seconds.
so we have a motion and a double second. Commissioner Lee made the motion. Commissioner Herrera started to make what sounded like another motion, but really she meant to do a second. And then
Yes.
at the same time, Commissioner Fox was seconding Commissioner Lee. So,
Have you got all that?
well, I'm tired. All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And that brings us to item 5, which is the second action item. This was the application of Reed Row for a subdivision of 5 acres on Pinto Road, carving out an acre of that. So I'll wait for a motion to go ahead and approve that one.
Well, I'll motion to approve in the matter of the application of Reed Row for the application, for the subdivision 5 acres into 2 lots, Lot 11, Edgewood Heights subdivision, Town of Edgewood, Santa Fe, New Mexico, AKA 25 Pinto Road.
Okay, we have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, the motion carries. So that brings us to our first discussion item for the night, the sign ordinance. Would it be okay if I go over the handout I gave you guys
Yes.
before we dive into the ordinance itself? What I handed out is a page of notes that I took while I was in Silver City back in September. One of the presenters was John Dubois, who's an attorney for the city of Albuquerque, who presented a really nice detailed history on the last day of all of the legal decisions that underlie sign ordinances falling left and right in legal challenges. So I just want to go through these real quick because all of them have important bearing on how we construct a sign ordinance. And there are things in our current ordinance that are clearly in violation of some of these court findings. The one that really jumps out is singling out political signs and real estate signs for any kind of special restriction related to the content of those signs. So he started with a finding in 1977. Most of these are cases that, virtually all of them, eventually made it to the Supreme Court with mixed results. The first one he went over goes all the way back to 1977. It took place in Willingboro Township, New Jersey. And basically what you had was a township during the civil rights era that was concerned about minority families moving into their area, causing what's called fleeing to the suburbs. They were worried that people were all going to suddenly put their houses up for sale, like there goes the neighborhood. So what they attempted to do was restrict real estate signs, because they said a sold sign on your property would be a signal to your next door neighbor to get the heck out of there. So the Supreme Court struck down that restriction on real estate signs. The town, as I said, was trying to prevent panic selling, and Justice Marshall noted that commercial speech was already protected in a prior case that was called Bigelow versus Virginia, and his worry was that the New Jersey law focused on content. So this is, 35 years before the most recent case, which is Reed v. Gilbert, that we'll get to. The Supreme Court was already leaning in this direction. Like if you're saying that sign's okay, but his sign's not okay because of what's written on them, that's not going to fly. And he said just that. Justice Marshall said restricting real estate signs while allowing other signs to proliferate restricts one group's First Amendment rights unfairly. So that takes us to 1981, a case called Metro Media, Inc. versus the City of San Diego. The Supreme Court overturned a restriction on all billboards in 1981. San Diego had tried to argue that billboards were a distraction, that they were a traffic hazard, and therefore should not be allowed. The problem was that the city failed to show that its asserted interest in aesthetics, which was the other part of their argument, was, quote, substantial in its commercial and industrial areas. The majority of the court agreed on this finding, but the odd thing is they couldn't agree on why they agreed. But the finding went ahead anyway. The Supreme Court said the lower court is overturned, billboards are allowed. Now, the city could have argued aesthetics are important, because look what's happened to our property values or, the economic development in the town since we've done things with our aesthetics. But they didn't. They just kind of said, well, aesthetics, everybody knows what that is, so they lost. It's kind of like, I can't describe profanity, but I know it when I see it, right? So fast forward 3 more years, Los Angeles versus the taxpayers of Vincent. So what happened was the city of Los Angeles was removing political campaign signs that were on public property, specifically, taped to light poles. And lots of sign ordinances restrict taping things to light poles. But the way Los Angeles went about it was a problem. The original finding that those signs should be taken down was actually upheld by the Supreme Court. Restricting signs in a particular public place does not generally impede political speech. They ruled there are other ways you can express the same political message, whether it's radio, whether it's having people on the streets handing out leaflets. And let me point out that our ordinance attempts to regulate leaflets. So I would be a little bit careful about, even going that far. The city's interest in aesthetics was found to be valid, and the city was found to not curtail speech no more than was necessary to avoid visual clutter. So this becomes like a really important concept. In restricting something, did you go further than you needed to? So if you were trying to restrict somebody who was running for office, who, had an outrageous message that was going to harm your city's future development, and you outlawed all that person's signs, or you outlawed signs like it, you wouldn't single out the person, but then you also outlawed that type of speech, and people also can't hand out leaflets with that objectionable message on it. Now maybe you've gone further than you needed to in the confines of a sign ordinance. So allowing people another outlet while restricting visual clutter, the Supreme Court found it acceptable. 10 years later, in 1994, the city of Ladue, Missouri versus Gillio. Margaret Gillio erected signs in her yard in opposition to the Persian Gulf War. This is on private property. They kept disappearing, so she called the police and said, somebody's stealing my signs. The police said that such signs are not allowed by our sign ordinance. Signs that express a controversial political opinion weren't allowed. She's only allowed 10 signs, or rather, Ladue only allows 10 types of signs. And they were things like residential markers, your house number, FSBO, house for sale, commercial signs in properly zoned areas. They only had 10 categories that were allowed, and a sign expressing a political opinion was not one of them. So they took all their signs down. It was struck down by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said it's okay to be concerned about clutter, but you can't completely restrict people from expressing themselves, especially where the person's identity is part of the message. Margaret Gillio wanted people to know Margaret Gillio is opposed to the war. And here's Margaret Gillio's house at 11 such and such street. So that was an important part of her message. And when they're speaking in their own home, you can't restrict people from doing it. Other means of expression were also not readily available. It's not like Margaret could go, buy radio time. I mean, she could, but it's not incumbent on her to come up with the money to express herself. If she wants to put a sign in her yard, that's fine. So you can kind of see where this is going. The Supreme Court is starting to lean in the direction of protecting individual rights over aesthetics, traffic safety, that we have to find a balance in those things. And unless the municipality has made a compelling argument that aesthetics or visual clutter is a problem, and they have to prove it, then the Supreme Court's going to find against you. What came next in 2001 was Lorillard Tobacco versus Riley. I think this one was in the Boston area. What Riley was trying to do was restrict signs advertising tobacco, and I think they had some kind of special product that was like all natural or something. And they said it shouldn't be within 1,000 feet of a school. And what the Supreme Court said was, that's too broad, okay? That there are lots of other things you don't restrict within 1,000 feet of a school. You can't just say totally restrict. Maybe you can talk about the specific kinds of things that they can't do. And it was preempted by federal law, which allows it. So that brings us to the case below, which became kind of a pivotal case. This was Central Hudson Gas and Electric versus Public Service Commission of New York. And this one, time machine backwards, this predates the tobacco case by 20 years. This was an attempt by the Public Service Commission in New York to put up signs encouraging electricity conservation during the oil embargo of 1973. So it was kind of like PSAs, putting things up that said, hey, use less electricity, we won't need as much fossil fuel, it's good for the state. But it also required electric companies to ban any language promoting the use of electricity. So now you have an electric company saying, electricity, it's clean, natural power, get away from gas and use electricity. And now you've got New York State saying, well, we don't want you doing that, and we're going to require that you don't do it. So what came out of this was a 4-part test that's really important as we go forward. So what the Supreme Court decided is that speech is protected, 1, only if it concerns lawful activity and is not misleading. 2, if the government interest that is the rationale for the ban is, quote, substantial. So you can't just say, we're going to ban billboards on 344 because it ruins the aesthetics and people get in accidents. You have to prove it. And you have to say, before we had billboards, we had 3 accidents. Now that we got billboards, we had 23. It has to be substantial. 3, the ban directly advances that interest. It can't be that something else advanced that interest and you're going to pin it on the billboards. 4, it reaches no further than necessary to accomplish the given objective. You can't then turn around and say, well, we're going to ban all signs on 344. Because if a billboard leads to more accidents, probably the smaller signs will too. So we're just going to ban everything. That's going too far. So those are restrictions. If you violate any of those 4 principles, expect to have your sign ordinance struck down, basically. There are other types of restrictions that have a better chance of survival. On to the next 3 rules that govern this. If what you're doing is content-based, so if you say real estate signs, right? We're only going to allow real estate signs for 90 days. Other signs are fine. Or we're not going to allow signs in the easement, but we're going to grant an exception to the town of Edgewood because we're putting a sign up for Wildlife West, so surely that's got to be okay. If you're doing it on the basis of content, and the rule, the way it was described to me was, if the enforcement officer has to read the sign to know whether or not to enforce it, you're violating constitutional rights. What the courts will apply, if you're governing things at all by content, is what's called strict scrutiny. And we'll get to strict scrutiny in just a second. That comes out of Reed versus Gilbert, which is Gilbert, Arizona. 2, if your signs are content-based, the courts are going to look at whether or not there's a compelling state interest in you going after the content of that sign. 3, you have to use the least drastic means. So in the case of the tobacco company versus Riley, you could prevent tobacco use by kids numerous different ways besides banning all signs. Were those things tried, or did you just go, we're going to ban signs? So if your signs are instead time, place, and manner-based, you're now going to be subject to, anytime you're court challenged, it will be subject to what's called intermediate scrutiny, which is a little less strict. It still spins on whether or not there is a significant or important state interest. Now, we're no longer talking about compelling state interest. Like I have to put signs up about Zika virus because people are dying. That would be compelling. Significant or important state interest might be even aesthetics. Suddenly aesthetics can be acceptable if you're regulating signs that way. That sign is just plain ugly. It's pink with flashing lights. It doesn't fit with everything else, and we're losing money as a town as a result. You might actually get away with that. Also, if your restriction is narrowly tailored, so you're saying, we're not outlawing everything, we're just outlawing things that are shockingly pink with flashing lights, okay? And that would be time, place, and manner-based. Now we're talking about manner. Also, if you allow alternative channels of communication, newspaper, radio, Facebook. Honestly, for the chamber, Linda, I've never understood why people are totally fixated on signs and you hear so little about Edgewood business on the radio. Okay. Probably Ford is the one exception. I used to hear them a lot on the classical station out of Santa Fe, but that's pretty much the only one. And I always cursed it because then everybody would come to their events and clog up the parking lot at the post office. But
They're advertised every morning on KOB too.
Yeah.
770, yeah.
it seems like a smart thing to do in the 21st century.
That's good for small businesses.
Mhm.
So when you're buying media in Albuquerque to reach customers that are here.
Right.
It's even worse. So that may be changing soon, but we'll see.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. We'll have a lot of discussion about this. I think the sign ordinance discussion is probably going to consume 10 months or more to get something done. I don't think we can do this quickly and easily. But I think actually, reaching radio, people who listen to the radio here, we all listen to radio stations from Albuquerque and Santa Fe. And if you look not just at the cost, but at the ratio between cost and benefit, I would guess that having a sign plunked out on the highway is probably not nearly as effective as being on the radio even once a month. I guess.
And 88.7 is kind of the East Mountain. They do
Yeah.
give event information
Mhm.
and things like that.
So then, that brings us to the case of Reed versus Gilbert. And this is the one everybody's talking about. When you hear people on council refer to, sign restrictions are unconstitutional, this is the one they're talking about. So Reed was a minister in the town of Gilbert, Arizona. He was a minister who had a church that had no building, and he would put signs out on Saturday saying, my church is meeting, here's where our church is, and he would display them all over town. And he would leave them up beyond the town's 24-hour time limit. I presume sometimes he put them up early, like on Friday, or sometimes they wouldn't get taken down till Tuesday. The town enforced their ordinance. They went out and collected Reed's signs. Reed took the town of Gilbert to court, and the town of Gilbert, Arizona won. Reed appealed his case, and the town of Gilbert won on appeal. The initial circuit courts there all ruled that there was no discrimination on the basis of content. They weren't saying, we're taking it down because it's a church sign. They said, we're taking it down because it's been up more than 24 hours, and, it's in an easement or whatever. So he requested cert from the Supreme Court. Cert stands for a Latin term, certiorari. It means permission to appear before the court. And it's rare that a case like this would be granted cert, but they granted Reed cert. And part of the reason he was hopeful that the Supreme Court would overturn the rulings of two courts was that the circuit courts had split. Out of all the circuit courts that ruled on this, the 8th and the 11th circuit courts ruled in Reed's favor, while all of the others went against him. And I guess in legal parlance, that's referred to as a split circuit, which kind of perks up the Supreme Court's antenna. So they looked at this split circuit decision that involved a church, and they granted him cert. Now, look at this. I mean, the case was first filed in 2005. It was heard by the Supreme Court in 2015. And because two of the courts had ruled that Gilbert had, in fact, enforced a content-based ordinance, whether or not they had, everyone else found they hadn't, but two circuits said they had. It fell to the Supreme Court under strict scrutiny. If the code enforcer has to read the sign to decide how to enforce it, it's discrimination. So they found in Reed's favor. The SCOTUS finding was unanimous, but in the aftermath, this is kind of cool. Justice Alito made a list, kind of based on his own logic. He looked at the case in retrospect and said, well, basically what we've decided then is here's what's allowed and here's what's not allowed. And he allows using content to determine if a sign is on or off premise. That's what fell out of his list. That clearly you can't not read a sign to determine if it's an on or off premise sign. And towns have a right to regulate off premise signs. So he carved out little tiny bits of where looking at content may actually be allowable. And then the last case I threw in is a recent one, has to do with forced speech. The city of Portland, Oregon required all masonry buildings that did not have steel reinforcement to have warnings on them that said, these are unsafe in earthquakes. I don't know how common earthquakes are in Portland. I would think not very. And they were challenged in court by the masonry industry that took them on and said that is content-based. The lower court struck down Portland's ordinance, and I don't know if this one has gone any further than that yet. I think this one is that recent. But it falls into that same hopper of when you start talking about content, you're on dangerous ground. It doesn't mean, as I've heard some of the council say, that you can't consider content at all. That's not completely true. You can't say, looking at content at all is unconstitutional. No. Looking at content puts you on dangerous ground where any challenge will be looked at under strict scrutiny. If you have a really good lawyer and you don't mind strict scrutiny, go for it.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So this Justice Alito made a list of what's allowed. He allowed using content to determine if a sign is on or off premise.
Right.
Meaning, does that mean date because of what the content is saying, because of the date, because it's over?
What it is, so if somebody has a sign that says, come to the Church Street Market, and it's 7.5 miles from the Church Street Market, and my town does not allow single off-premise signs. The rationale would be, well, if a given business can do that, can 17 other businesses do that?
Oh, I see. Okay.
And maybe, there's somebody who goes, well, I've got an empty lot there, I don't mind you putting those signs there. Now you have this proliferation of commercial signs, and many of those are temporary signs
Like Walmart.
that stay up beyond 90 days anyway.
Like the ones right between Walmart
When you
and
pull.
And I'm not-
pull out
Church
Walmart.
Street.
I mean, Church Street Market is the one that just comes to mind. I'm not calling them out for any particular reason. What you can end up with is people advertising their businesses all over town. Now, have you, jeopardized the aesthetics of the town? Probably. Have you potentially complicated traffic and introduced the risk of accidents? If they're near intersections and they're unregulated, probably. So can you restrict that? But the only way to know whether to restrict it or not is to know whose sign it is. It's like, wait, you put a sign there, but you're 7.5 miles away. Put that in your own business.
Okay.
What about directional signage that says, that you see for, we don't have it out here per se, but you see on the west side where the construction is going on.
Right.
They'll have several directional signs based on the builder, like head this direction for this builder, this direction for that
Mhm.
builder. Off premise.
No, because those are not, I don't think of those as much as, like a permanently sited commercial business. If you talking about where they're building?
Yeah, like, for example, Mariposa, okay, it's a big development.
Right.
Master plan, then there'll be signs that tell you which direction to go in there to find the building that's being currently done, which develops over a period of time, usually takes more than a year to build out.
Yep.
So those signs are there.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like a temporary sign.
So temporary would be years long.
A lot of them seem to be granted 90 to 180 days. And I would say, if you're putting up a temporary sign, get a permit. Well, yeah. This is where it gets wiggly. Do you have something in between temporary and permanent? Would a sign like that be permitted? What's it made out of?
Well, they look damn nice.
Well, is it little wobbly wires with a piece of plastic stuck on the wobbly wires? Is it a stake driven in the ground like a real estate sign? This is where you can regulate by time, manner, and place. So you can say, if it's on wobbly little wires, it's a temporary sign, it can only be there for 90 days. If it's, quote, nice, I wouldn't use the term nice, now you're in the aesthetic zone. I would use the term durable. If I decide it's durable and weather-worthy, I might say, well, that's a sign that should be permitted. So maybe you have two levels of permit. If somebody had a need for that kind of sign, you'd go, well, that's an intermediate time frame. You can permit that for $100. And if you come back in 6 months and tell me you need to permit it again, oh yeah, you can renew your permit, but it's $300 to renew. In other words, the longer you want to cling to your temporary or intermediate sign, the more you pay. So now there's an incentive to just get a permanent sign. Now, you're calling it a directional sign. I don't know, a lot of us use GPS these days. Do you really want signs with arrows all over the town of Edgewood that say, open house Caldwell Banker this way? And you know as well as I do, those things stay up forever until the wind claims them. So this is going to be the hardship of trying to come up with a sign ordinance. And I looked at the existing ordinance, and I don't want to dominate this whole meeting. Looking at the existing ordinance, it really needs to be changed badly. But there are things in there that are probably worth keeping. And I looked at a few others. I looked at one from Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, which is where the town of Hollis-Inwood is. A really weird Welsh name that's hard to say. King of Prussia's there, too, where Kentucky Fried Chicken is based. But their sign ordinance looks a lot like ours, except it's 90-something pages.
That's ridiculous.
I know.
No sign ordinance should be more than 10.
Yeah, and in a way, ours does some good things with examples of different kinds of signs. But as I read it, I was like, is that just an example, or is that a list of permitted signs?
That's where the problem lies.
Yes, it's like, here are the ones you can do. Canopy, this, that, lighted, over doorway, wall-mounted. But then what ours does that's problematic is it immediately gets into the particulars of each one of those. So it's like the text must be at least 40% of the sign face, and, I wouldn't want to go that far.
No, and we don't, because it's
It's
too
unenforceable.
hard. It is too hard to regulate. Here's what I care about, that your sign isn't dominating the whole building, but you're able to see it. I don't care if they have a sign and then another sign over the door. I don't care if they have one in their window. I don't care about that. I care about those awful flags. I don't want those, because the wind out here tears those things up, and then they look like trash.
There's one blowing today.
Yeah,
Right up there.
they're awful.
And that would be a good example of, do you have the right to regulate a sign that is easily damaged by wind in a place that's well-known for howling winds? You probably do.
And the sun.
And the sun,
To-
yeah,
totally.
so banners they get, worn out really fast because of the sun and the
Right.
wind.
Yeah.
Um,
That reflection of either someone wants to put a banner or someone wants to put a flag, and they tear or they fade, so that they become pointless in a way.
Mhm.
I mean, if they want to replace it, it's their additional expense. So are you regulating the existence of the item, or are you regulating the ability to promote a business? That's kind of where
Well-
that's all thought through really well.
My initial draft of this, which is in the packet for tonight, and this is nowhere near an ordinance, it's just notes I took on the fly. I had two documents going on my computer, the one I just went over and the bones of an ordinance. Like, we have to consider this, we have to consider that. I said things like vinyl banners and flags should be considered temporary signage. At the end of 90 days or 180 days, whatever we agree is appropriate, they're gone. Get a real sign. You can't keep your vinyl banner with one corner of it hanging down for the first, year and a half of your business's existence.
Get a real sign.
It's a public hazard. And it doesn't do well for your business and other businesses in town. It doesn't show well for the town, which is probably bad for everyone. And I know signage is expensive. That's why the other part of the ordinance I'd love to retain is some kind of incentive plan. It would be nice to promote multi-business kiosks, and we went around this when I was on council, and the problem was business wanted the town to pay for it. That gets a little bit wiggly. I hope we don't allow air dancers. Those things on Manal that go
Yeah.
scare the bejesus out of you every time you go past. And again, they'd become trash inside of a few weeks anyway, especially if it's April or May. So, I'll let you guys do some of the talking here, and I'll try to shut up, but what you have in your packet is just the bare bones of what do we have to think about. And then I started a document today, sitting in my kitchen, that is, it's already up to a page, but it's just like, what would I want to keep? What would I want to throw out? What am I not sure about?
I know, this is really,
Yeah, I know. So is my demise with the Albuquerque Public Schools. I hope they get me back working again. Moriarty doesn't call often enough.
well, if we
Glenn,
take it.
Glenn, I have a question. I got one sheet but no back. Do you have any extras of those?
Let me
Just
look,
for the
my
fun.
printer ran out of paper. in
Well,
the
we can do
middle of
that
this.
after the meeting, but
Yeah.
I just was hoping you had some.
My printer ran out of paper in the middle of it.
Yeah, and the
Yeah,
second thing
Here's
is,
a good one.
I almost see a development of a computer code that we put in pictures of signs and say, does it meet the ordinance? This ordinance is almost that complex. It runs through the checklist for you. I mean, I don't know how hard that would be, but probably it would be a lot better for you to have that at your fingertips,
That'd be great.
to-
Comes from a very good time where there was particular individuals who really wanted to regulate things. And this is the result of that.
It also comes from a period of time where we didn't have anything, and we were borrowing liberally from other communities.
Right, but not for people.
Right. Yeah, it feels like it was taken from a lot of different places and just thrown together, and it's just so over the
Oh,
top.
I suspect it
Can't
was taken from
regulate.
a place. In fact, the Montgomery County ordinance is very similar to this in a lot of ways. The nice thing about the Montgomery County one, and I'll send you the link, I can probably send it right now, it has a table. You know how I like tables. It's like, what's allowed in each zone? And it's like NA, 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 because those things are never allowed in a given zone. And then it's like, well, in this zone, digital signs are allowed, but how many nits? And I had to educate myself on what's the difference between a nit and a lumen. This is all stuff we have to talk about. I suspect, digital signs are going to be the thing.
Yeah. So the complaints that we get in our office weekly from one individual with a very loud voice is the signs that are all over town in the easement. And I agree. I do not like signs about glass repair or whatever else there is, handyman or whatever. I mean, they're sticking them to the stop signs, they're sticking them to the light poles. They're wired to the stop signs. I mean, if in the intersection there on Route 66 and 344,
Right.
there was that sign everywhere. The one guy, all over.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, no, because we're going to get the call. And we did. We got the call. And not only did we get the call, I got the call, Tim got the call, the library got the call.
library.
Yeah, because nobody answered the phone when the third complaint came in.
Well, my ravings on this issue, on page 1, right after definitions, I said placement restrictions. Very first thing, no sign shall be placed in a legally established road easement or median. No sign shall be placed closer than 50 feet to a roadway or intersection. No sign shall be placed on a fence, utility pole, or roadside vegetation. No sign shall be placed on a rooftop, and no permanent sign shall be placed without a permit. Violate any of those things, your sign's coming down. Do it a second time, you'll see a fine. Do it a third time, you'll see a stiffer fine. I don't know how else to do it.
I don't either, but we've got to get at least that under control where we're
Yes.
putting signs in the right of way, especially because that is a huge no-no on DOT roads.
I know.
And especially when you're wiring them to the stop signs and directional signs and things like that, it's like, ugh.
Yep,
But what's awful is they're wired. So we have to go park somewhere and then get out into the street and go over there and clip them off. It's awful.
yep.
In part, I think that's, I may be wrong, but would that be easily regulated by saying you can't affix signs to government property
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah.
as DOT?
Yep.
Yeah. But 50 feet? Why not any sign?
It's just off the top of my head. What are you suggesting? 10,
Well,
20?
I think you need to be within readable distance of a roadway. I don't know what that would be, and it depends on the speed you're traveling, I get that, but 50 feet is going to be into private property pretty much anywhere in town.
How big are the easements?
The easements can be what, 25 feet, 50 feet?
Yeah, darn close to that. That's basically just outside the easement on a lot of roads.
Yeah.
And, I just pulled this out of my head while I was in Silver City. We can refine that. But this is the thing. We're trying to balance the needs of not just the commercial, the business community in Edgewood. That's not what this is about. In fact, I had a hard time defining sign. Most sign ordinances do. I can't say a sign is a thing that advertises a business, because it isn't. A sign is a thing that expresses a message in either text, pictures, video. It's very, very loose. So now, if I allow your sign 30 feet to the highway, or to, Hill Ranch Road or whatever, Church Street, do I also allow a 200 square foot video display? It gets wiggly. It gets wiggly real fast. And I especially don't want to get into size of fonts, speed limits. Montgomery County, Pennsylvania does in their ordinance. I wouldn't want to go there. And I'm aware that sign science, that someone we both know used to talk about a lot, comes from Pennsylvania. A lot of what was cited when we talked that way about this. I would say here,
Montgomery County, because I used to live there.
Yeah.
Is full of roads that go like this,
mm-hmm,
with lots of trees.
mm-hmm,
So their speed limit, as you're doing this, obviously are not as fast as we can get to go here in straight lines, for one thing. Their distance isn't as far either.
Right.
To be able to see. So it's a very different environment.
So I would say two things. The size of the font is your worry. I'm going to regulate how big a sign you're allowed to have, the maximum size. You decide how to make your message clear. I'm not going to say, oh, well, the speed limit just went up on the highway, so now you can have bigger letters. You decide what works for your business. But at the same time, we have to think about a commercial zone. So one of the things that's in the existing ordinance that I kind of like is the notion of an overlay.
Yes. We
So
need
what
an
you
overlay zone
allow
anyway.
in this part of town is different than what you allow in that part of town. Now, the fastest speeds in this town are not in the commercial zone. The fastest speeds are north of Venus, where there's very little commercial, some of it probably badly placed. And when you get down where there's a lot of commercial activity, what's the speed limit there? 35, I think, is the fastest, right?
40 for Venus.
35 until you get beyond the feed store on Old 66. It goes up as you get heading out of town, up by Tractor Supply. It starts to speed up, and then once you're out over the hill, it's 55.
And on 344, you've got 40 from Venus to Church, I believe, and then south of Church, it's 35.
Correct.
Yeah.
But now we're talking the details. To me, we cannot neglect this challenge? Because tonight, we just approved for a church to put up a sign, but we don't have anything to guide that for them. And it's going to be the same I mean, we need some guidance before the fact to approve, yes, the rezoning, but to approve the sign almost.
Can you tell me about the house sign, the number sign?
So, we had a guy come in that had like a 20-foot, square foot sign for his address. But he put it in the easement. But I started looking at the sign ordinance, and as long as he moved it onto his property, there's really, residential's exempt for addressing.
But we don't want those kind of signs for addressing, right?
No, I wouldn't handle that as an exception. In fact, I would jettison most of the exception section of the current ordinance,
Right.
including exceptions for the town of Edgewood placing signs. I think we all play by the same rules.
Like the,
And I would say in residential zones, what's allowed is signs up to this size that are building mounted or yard mounted. We have to talk about window signs. But a lot of ordinances seem to treat addressing in a very specific way that doesn't run afoul of the Supreme Court.
So I think that, from what the feedback we got from the community for the comp plan, kind of told us that aesthetics matter.
Right.
People want
True.
the town to remain, have a pleasant appearance.
Right.
I think that the business owners also want that, but they're worried about being able to get people into their business. So somehow, the commercial overlay, I think, is a great way to be able to say, in the commercial zone, we can do X, but in other areas, we're not going to do X, we're going to do Y. And I think that might be the happy medium that is a good balance for the community, as well as those businesses.
Mhm.
So, yeah, and I think that having ideas of how to accomplish those, all of those businesses along 66 and Georgeport, and Lincolnport, the area, they all suffer unless their business is in one of the buildings right up front where people can see it. So we do have to address how can someone get an off-premise sign that's going to help people find those other businesses that are, back there. It's an issue for a lot of different businesses. But I believe there's an aesthetic way to do it.
That is actually probably the prime location for a multi-business kiosk.
I would like to do, and I asked Carla this, and I think the answer was actually no, if we could use lodger's tax money to do a kiosk in each area of the town for businesses, and they could just slide
Wait,
their
the
name in there.
answer was
and in
no?
and out. The answer was no.
Why?
No, it doesn't, yes, that initial answer was no, but we can revisit that.
This was an attorney's opinion?
A quick attorney's opinion, but,
I mean, I think it's,
A way to potentially, if the structure were there, but the town weren't paying for the sign
Right,
itself.
just the
Right.
structure, that's what I was thinking, and then they could pay to put the sign in.
Yeah.
They just,
That's a
it just
thought.
slides in, if
Mhm.
they go out of business, slides out, the new one slides it in. But if we had, one in those areas where it's really hard to, and then we've got so many different looking signs in that area, and it looks awful, I just think that everybody will benefit from it, so I thought maybe we could use lodger's tax, or maybe some type of Main Street grant money or something like that.
it would have to go in the right-of-way somewhere, it can be on someone's property,
Right.
unless we
But-
have.
but just think about tonight, well, it was last Tuesday night that we really approved it and then went through the legal parts tonight. That sign for the church, do we have any clue what,
Did he give you a size?
Yeah, he's fine. Whatever they're wanting to do now that they're going to be changed to SU if it passes town council, they can do they can do a lit sign if they want, a lit sign, a lighted sign.
A digital display?
Yes,
I would guess that's what's coming.
and that's what they're
Right.
wanting to do.
But-
Of course.
Um,
The
if I were the
the
church,
Episcopal Church has a trench with wires in it.
Yeah, but if I were the church, I would want to get a little guidance so they don't have to go through a second step process to get approval of the sign.
Well, it's just in-house approval, so it'll be fine. And we've already spoken to them about their sign, but when I was looking at it, I was like, gosh, you guys are zoned the wrong thing. You know, you're
Right.
zoned residential, which restricts you from changing your sign if I really
Yeah.
wanted to be a jerk about it.
I think,
You know,
I kind of agree with
so-
Glenn. This is something that's going to have to be done in some form or fashion.
And,
We're-
and right
we're
now,
not
we have
really-
no regulation at all, really. Nothing enforceable.
Some are better looking than others.
Mm-hmm.
They're very distracting
Yeah.
depending how they're programmed. How does that fit in with our dark skies ordinance?
As long as they aren't, so like in Bernalillo, we have a gas station that has a sign that literally, a digital sign that blinds you. So it has, I think the lumens have to be, I can't remember what the rule is.
What our current ordinance says, it talks about, and it kind of predates digital signs, almost.
Yeah.
But it talks about, like, blinders over the top and sides of it, that there are ways to kind of reduce the
But
impact.
those are regular, like an analog sign. You're not talking about a digital sign.
No, this is a digital sign. And then also, what you'll sometimes see, and it's in our ordinance, is turn it off at 11 PM
Yeah.
or close of business, whichever is later. Now, midnight, I'm good with that. But people put up digital signs and they leave them on 24/7. I'm not so sure that's a good thing, once you have like 10 or 12 of them around town.
Well, it's just going to create more visual clutter, which is
Yeah.
kind of the point of trying to revisit the sign ordinance.
Yeah.
Yeah, did McDonald's have to come to you with their new sign that they have, showing the hamburger, and
Yes,
They did.
they came,
it's pretty high.
mhm,
Yeah.
yeah.
Everyone here, well, I won't say everyone, a lot of businesses are focused on reaching the interstate.
Yeah.
They want to
Yeah.
get themselves visible from the interstate. So, if you talk about a commercial overlay, are you within your rights to say, you can have a taller sign if you are within so many feet of the interstate, that you're trying to reach that? And then somebody says, well, that's not fair. I'm down in a valley and I'm further away from the interstate than him, so I need a taller sign than him.
Well, and you have to worry about the people that are on the south side of Route 66.
Right.
When you get those taller signs, we had one complaint with the hotel sign, was that, now I can't see South Mountain.
Right.
So everybody, there's always something. But,
Yep.
and you can't cover everything.
None of those motel signs subtend an arc to keep somebody from seeing South Mountain, unless they live right there on the premises almost. That seems like somebody's lying.
I also think that if you go to the trouble of getting somebody off the freeway and they can't find where they're trying to get to once they're off the freeway.
Yes.
That's our biggest problem.
Mhm.
That really is all of those businesses along 66, once you have to turn down another street, coming off the interstate, people might be able to see Dairy Queen on that side. Maybe they'll see Walmart as they get closer, but not realize that there's a lot of other businesses still
Right.
there.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different elements to consider.
Yeah,
but I think the aesthetics is an important piece of it.
I noticed, coming from Albuquerque, I don't think that there's a sign where, where they always have gas and food, and then they have the picture Denny's, but it's
And
not right, it's like right before the exit. And it should be, down by, not Cedillo Hill, but, down by the hill coming up to Edgewood or something.
Well, I was going to say, I don't know why we don't have those blue signs on the interstate utilized, but I know the answer to that question.
Yeah, it's expensive, I
It's
heard.
expensive. So that would probably be a good investment, to say, this exit, food, Chili Hills, McDonald's, whatever it is. Get it on that blue sign. It's probably the best investment you
For every town
can
on
make.
the entire interstate system, and we're probably the only ones that don't have it.
This is kind of subjective, but that's how I do it. I mean, I
No,
read the
I
blue signs,
agree.
And if I get off in a little town like this and I'm driving interstate, I don't make a decision till I drive around it a little bit, and I go, oh, what's over here? Oh, what's over there? I'll just go here. You know, I don't rely strictly on signage. Maybe I'm a kind of an outlier, but,
That's very helpful to have that sign there.
But the businesses have to pay,
I know, they're gonna have to
To be
pay
on
for
there.
something anyway.
and like Walmart,
Applies to certain.
that's not a big deal,
Right.
but like.
You can see
uh,
that from like almost outer space.
Yeah,
You know, you can see it from like way away from exit
no,
187.
I mean, this,
The actual
the sign on the interstate
Yeah.
saying, we got a Walmart over here, and then at the bottom of the off-ramp, they'll point you gas station
I
this
know.
way.
What I'm saying is you can see
But-
the Walmart itself from
Yeah.
like several miles from the exit.
But a lot of these businesses don't want to pay to have a sign on the interstate, which, you know, I don't think the town would want
Like you
to.
see Moriarty
can't.
signs
We
way,
can't.
way back here,
Right,
you know.
they're poorly placed.
Yeah.
The ones that are
Yeah.
there are very poorly placed and don't serve Edgewood well. So that's another reason businesses aren't enthusiastic about spending that money, because you're practically to buy the off-ramp.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's what I thought.
Signs, and
Hmm.
if you're in the left-hand lane, too late.
Right.
Yeah,
When were
that's
those
true.
put there, I wonder?
It's kind of recent, it looks fairly new, I noticed it, and I hadn't seen it before.
You know, New Mexico also does this funny thing I'm noticing with exits. It'll say like, exit 187, 1 mile. It's not 1 mile. It's 1 mile between this exit and this ramp. It's like, it's actually a half mile. I've measured a bunch of them. Cedillo's one of them. Tehajale was the one I first noticed that's out toward the Pueblos. It's not really a mile. It's like
It doesn't
they,
give people much warning.
maybe they'll reposition the sign, I don't know.
Once you get off the freeway, if you're headed eastbound and you get off, if you don't know this town, and you're trying to go north, and you've missed that there's a turn there under the overpass.
Right,
Now you're trying to maneuver a U-turn, and it's
Yeah.
very confusing for people.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is horrible.
That's no favors with that interchange.
Yeah, it's all they could do.
So we've convinced ourselves that this is a big deal, this sign ordinance.
Yeah,
I mean, that's what my conclusion walking out of here. It's a big deal that we have to somehow deal with it.
It needs to be simplified.
Yes.
So we just have to take it section by section, or make, you know,
Yeah, just
decide
like we've
what,
done
how
before.
we're gonna,
Chop it up and put it back
categorize
Yep,
together.
chop it up and type right here and,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, so I don't want to hog the whole meeting with this, but I was planning to do just that, to start taking it apart by section, going section 1C. What does that say? Do we want to keep it or toss it? Rewrite it.
I think first we have to probably think of on a larger system or system approach about, okay, if we go down and start working on the details, what's our total objective for this? And maybe we can lay out some broader guidelines first.
First, yeah.
We need what?
Overarching vision of what
Yeah.
you're trying to do.
yeah, yes.
Well, it's to allow self-expression, to allow or facilitate community notifications, emergencies and stuff, and to promote business. You know, that, you just, that defines what a sign is, so then you take it from there. And it's got to be a compromise where I have to regulate signs, and if you have the lesser value real estate that's further away from the interstate or around a bad intersection, gee, I'm sorry, but I can't help that. I can't make that problem go away. We have to find something that's sort of in the middle that gives you a fair shake, but, you know, if you don't do as well as the guy who's closer to the interstate, sorry. But we can come up with some creative ideas. I'd really like to do kiosks.
Yes.
I'm surprised that we can't use lodger's tax, because I was always told that lodger's tax had more flexibility than GRT.
We may still be able to. The
Yeah.
other question is if you put the kiosks up and none of the businesses buy into it, what you have sitting there is a bunch of empty kiosks.
Right.
Maybe that's something you can ask at one of your
That's
meetings.
it.
if they
That's what
would
I
be
thought.
interested in
If we
doing
put
that.
it up, will you use it?
I would say in general, yes, in certain locations, because it's been a topic of discussion. And the chamber and the board has talked about it. We've looked at, is there a way that we could create these? And we just aren't in a position to fund it.
Right.
We think that the businesses, especially those in those hard-to-find places, would appreciate it, and depending on the cost of what it's going to cost to put that in, and maybe it's an annual fee to the cost of membership. Then the other question is there enough space on the kiosk for all the businesses that are like active? And we have to find something that's large enough to accommodate those businesses or potential businesses, and it's not a built-out street, and still maintain an aesthetic, still maintain a size that's reasonable.
Well, my first pass at this ordinance, what I said is, I think one of the things I said was we'd favor digital there in kiosks. Because it's easily changeable.
No, that's true.
Let's
But it would be
How do you
more,
imagine
wouldn't that be
this
more
kiosk?
expensive?
Huh?
put a
Probably
kiosk
initially.
at the bottom of the
Well,
freeway.
setting it up initially would be more.
And say you put a kiosk coming off the freeway, down in that corner so people can see it,
Where Stuckey's was?
something like that.
Yeah.
And what you've got is businesses listed that are as far apart as, say, Denny's and a Chinese restaurant. Does the kiosk then, what's the directional?
Right.
Does it just say, here are businesses in Edgewood, find your way to them?
Yeah.
They could be
Yeah.
separated by,
You probably need more than one thing. You know, I hate to mention it again, but you probably need some synergy of blue sign out on the interstate, kiosk down at the street level, probably more than one kiosk. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
so-
I was
so-
thinking kiosks like at the beginning of like George Court or,
Yes.
that's where I was.
That's what we've talked about.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. I mean, I agree, we need some sort of directional, business district this
Yeah.
way and this way, you know what I mean?
Like
South
arrows,
66,
maybe?
they have
Yeah,
a
Big
little
something.
easier.
arrow on this side, and,
And when,
like,
so
who
they
put
know.
up that sign by the China Chef? There's China Chef, and there's a hair cutting place, and,
Yeah,
so who put that up, or what, is that just from that,
I think it's from just that
that
little
building
development.
that was right there?
Yeah,
It's been many things, but
Yeah.
like a finance
Yeah.
office, and,
And Subway's really fortunate because you can see them from the interstate.
yeah.
Can't find it.
Yeah. I can.
Well, every business, every other business that's been in that building has gone out of business.
yeah, it's true.
Well, now,
right.
there could be
Workout
multiple reasons
places.
for that. That we, in the position to regulate signs, are challenged to prove that our needs are compelling. I guess I would say the same to the business community, that when you say over and over, we need signs to promote our business, prove it. Who says that signs enhance business?
I think
We all say that, but do we really know that?
Someone to help you find a place.
Okay.
Right? If you don't have a sign, you've got 4 shops there, and you have a sign, no signs on any of them. You don't know which one you're going in, which door you're going in.
Yeah.
You need a sign for that.
Well, and the problem too is the road isn't connected, so if you turned in the wrong, I think Cheryl brought this up before.
bad connectivity over
That
there.
you go in the one entrance, but then you're stopped. You can't, you needed to go to the other road, It needs to be.
Yeah.
Connection among all
Connects.
of those, so that
Yeah.
you
The George Court stuff?
back out onto 66.
Yeah, coming in the back.
Create a little bit more of a pedestrian.
Well,
feel.
I'm suggesting that we have to loosen some of our view of regulating signs, and the business community may have to loosen some of their view of what they actually need. We all have to step back and kind of reconsider it. For me to say, well, maybe I don't need to regulate what percentage of the sign is text, I would ask you to step back and say, well, maybe it's not true that more signs are better. You know, that maybe a kiosk and a directional is enough.
Our meeting on Thursday, our coach meeting, is about marketing.
Mm-hmm.
To share information with members, because there are a lot of other ways that you need to market a business.
Yeah.
besides the sign.
That's right.
The sign is your last resort.
Right.
If they don't know where they're going
Right.
in the first place, the sign's not going to help, unless it's someone coming off the interstate and they're looking for food or gas, which they look around and they're like, oh, here, or here, right? So a sign's not going to matter if you're China Chef down the road.
Right.
To pull that person who's just getting off for a quick stop.
Yeah.
It's a different kind of marketing, but the signage is important to find. And I do think a kiosk would help those businesses that are off of our main corridors. Even though George Court connects to 66, you don't have a frontage to it.
Right.
Yeah.
Church Street Market is down Church Street. So how do you know if there are businesses down there, beehives down there, and medical centers down there? So those kind of streets off the main artery would be the ideal place to say, down this way you'll find East Mountain Medical, Beehive Homes, Church Street Market. And it'll help, I would think, for people to become aware of what's here and for traffic flow. People won't be beautiful U-turns everywhere, running through the Walmart parking lot, like, where's this place something?
Does the new medical complex have signs out at all? I don't think so.
First choice.
Big sign.
Just
I mean,
So-
that sign
Not
on the
along
building.
324.
On the building,
That's
yeah.
it.
So how would you communicate
That could be
with the
light.
business owner? Like, is that the chamber that, do you go to them, or would there be a way to get some kind of consensus of, this is what we're thinking about, to get them to communicate? You know, what,
But the chamber can certainly facilitate in trying to reach businesses or getting feedback from our members. We have almost 200 members, while they're not all sitting here in Edgewood. 58% of them are, so.
See, in the Church Street Market, I don't want to pick on them too much, but it jumps out in my mind as one of those where signage is the last thing you'd want to do to promote that business. When you're like, how far are they off the highway? 2 miles, a mile and a half?
About 2
Mile
miles.
down Church.
It's about
So
2.
a mile and a half.
Yeah.
From the interchange.
That's probably like not
They-
viable.
They absolutely are one of the best businesses at marketing, using social media.
Right.
And other means.
That's
And
probably
they
your
have-
ticket.
That's how they
Yeah.
draw people. It's not necessarily, it's certainly not the signage in front of their location. That's
It's the
drawing.
kid that they have standing on the corner that's
On the weekends,
doing
sometimes,
this.
yeah, during
See, and this is where I can't say, well, this business should have this kind of sign, and that business can only have that kind of sign. They chose where to locate, all right? They are outside the commercial overlay. So they have some special needs, and I want to regulate signs in a way that allows businesses like that to still be successful. But I also can't say, well, for them, the rule is different, you know?
Well, and I totally get that. Wildlife West would be another example.
Yes.
Right. You can't, you really even can't see it from the.
That's
picture
right.
unless you know you're looking for it.
Right.
Right.
So they do a lot of other kinds of outreach, but especially for them, that frontage road
Mhm.
comes up so fast. They do need
Yes.
They've put up one of those big signs, like right after you get off the exit, and they're having an event, or it's coming up.
Yeah.
It's pretty big, right
Sandwich
there on
sign.
the, sandwich sign right there on the, get off the freeway.
That's
So people kind of know where, it's got the arrow.
in the problem sign
And
bin.
it is, I know, and
Yeah.
that's,
It's a temporary sign, although I understand it's there for a long
It's a
time.
median
Summer
sign.
season.
Yeah.
That's one of the areas that the chambers tried to work on, improving the appearance of those temporary signs by creating sandwich board signs
Yeah.
that are painted nice and then we do nicely printed overlays on top of them to change for events. Because we don't want to make the town look trashy either.
right.
And we are hoping by setting a better example of what a temporary sign looks like, that other people might pick up on it, fairly not
But then on the other hand, we've got this brand-new medical facility that really does a good job, it seems like, having visited there and everything. They need to know how to, if they're on the interstate and somebody's sick, how to get there. Now, I mean, that helps us, yeah, because it helps keep the facility there, but it also is saying that we got services for you when you need it too, and here's how to get there.
In this town, we have 3 medical centers.
Yeah, I know.
We have 2 dentists, and we have multiple alternative wellness people, acupuncture,
Yeah.
chiropractors.
Right.
So, we have more medical care than the right to it, which is but for less to have it, right? So, yeah, I can see.
And-
I mean,
well, and, you know,
urgent care is-
You got the PT up there,
Do
you
they
know.
have after-hours urgent care at First Choice?
I don't know if they currently do. That was part of the original plan. Do you know?
No, they don't.
So,
I've seen,
that East Mountain Medical does to a certain degree, but they're limited. Everyone in town is pretty limited on
Is, is that the one down by Beeline, East Mountain Meadow? Yeah,
Yeah, and
they're good too.
Lab down there as well.
Urgent care at,
have you seen blue signs that say medical center? or
Usually they
something?
say hospital, and that's
Or
really
hospital.
not what this is.
Well, it's not a hospital, but yeah.
See, the thing we want to be cautious of is because someone's not going to pull off a freeway in an emergency and they're like, where? And
Right.
it's closed.
Yeah,
And,
right,
you know,
yeah.
We don't have a hospital. We
No.
don't have a trauma center. We don't have anything like that.
And what I'm saying in this first draft is signs that are regulated elsewhere, like traffic control signs, blue hospital signs, signs that businesses can buy that are out on the interstate. We don't regulate that. If it's regulated somewhere else, we don't do it. Well, I don't want to beat this to death tonight, Tanya. I'm going to ask you, tell us when to stop, because we have another discussion item.
We do.
It's a lot to think about.
It is.
It is, and I
really-
think what, the best thing to do is to first pick apart what, like you had said, what we want to keep in the old ordinance and what we want to get rid of, and then tie it together with new ideas that we have and see what we come up with.
Do you have the current ordinance in a digital form that is not a PDF? Is there anything I can take my
no.
saw to,
I don't.
start chopping it up?
Unfortunately.
All right.
Usually when we start doing these ordinances, I usually retype them, so we have digital.
Okay.
We just won't have the pictures,
All right,
so.
I'll see what I can do, but I'm going to start chopping it up.
A lot of PDFs I
I
can't
have
do.
that, I'll
Yeah.
have to see, I think what may screw it up is maybe the picture, well,
Yeah, they usually make a lot of mistakes.
yeah.
Well, they do, but at least it's a start.
But it's
You don't have to
something, yeah.
retype.
I do have that, I'll try it and see what I can do.
At the very least, I think where I'm going to start is to index it,
Yeah.
what each section is.
Yeah.
I'll just kind of outline it, and then we can take it from
So we
there.
can start.
Should we call it done for tonight on this and move
Yeah.
on to your next one?
Yep.
To be continued.
Sure,
Yes, absolutely. I'm so glad you came tonight, really.
Yeah, it's really interesting to realize signs are a lot more important than you would normally just think about, until you start thinking of their purpose and the outcomes.
And anymore, they're really hard to define.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of communities that do a good job of keeping the aesthetics.
Tucumcari is horrible. They don't have any way, when you get off the interstate, a lot of their stuff that they've advertised, you can't find.
I've never
Yeah,
been-
it's kind of difficult.
You gotta go
there, yeah.
across and then go up another side or something like that.
They got that kind of loop
Well, like, the
thing.
McDonald's is hard to find there.
All right.
Well, we
we'll
also
move on.
got to keep in mind, my retirement, I've already got a Statue of Liberty outfit, but I don't have the big sign yet. I think they give you that. But I want the freedom.
And you're
to-
taking a
to get out
hip-hop
there.
dance
Yeah.
class?
I've been practicing.
Is this imminent?
It-
See, if we didn't
Few
have a
years
sense of
down the
humor
road.
about this, we'd
Yeah.
crack.
I'm getting, you have to get ready for stuff.
And then, I'll be perfectly blunt, there's also the consideration that 10 months from now, we'll hear from people who we hadn't seen in 10 months, who shoot it all down anyway.
Who tripped us
That's
at
true.
the finish line?
All right,
Okay.
so we're going to move on to the next discussion item that, I'm going to shut my mouth for this one, and Tanya, you lead the show. This is your thing.
Okay, you know how I roll when I
This is item
introduce.
7, vacant property ordinance.
So this is just the introduction. I want you guys to give me your feedback on how you feel about this. I went to an infrastructure conference, and the conversation was about, gosh, what town was it that lost their mine? No, up north, by Taos. I can't remember. Anyway, some town up north that their mine closed and a lot of people have left and there's all of these vacant houses.
Oh, is it Red River?
No,
No?
not Red River.
Huh,
I can't-
Cuesta?
Cuesta.
Yeah.
There it is.
Cuesta, yeah.
Cuesta. So, they were talking about, how to get people to come to Cuesta. They really didn't want to be a tourist place, but that's what they've become. So they had people, come in and talk to the town about turning their vacant homes into Airbnbs. Anyway, what that turned into was other towns that have vacant properties and having a vacant property ordinance. And with all of the vacant properties that we have around town that have turned into issues with people breaking in and, the cops are called
Having
and
fires
what have
inside
you.
them
Yeah.
all the time and all that
Got me to thinking that it would be really smart for us to have a vacant property ordinance that has people letting us know, hey, we're moving out, we're leaving this vacant for a while because we don't know what we're doing with it. But it also gives us a chance for them to say, this is who's taking care of it, or this is the maintenance plan that I have for it as far as vegetation and things like that goes. So I just wanted to show you a few examples in here, let you guys think about it, see if you think that this is important as well, because, we have a lot of properties that people just up and leave.
Yeah.
And, we
Yeah.
look at their mailing address on the assessors in there in California or Texas or whatever. And their place is fine, other than it's just overgrown with vegetation.
Yeah.
And so we're sending them letters, and they're like, well, geez, I don't know who to get for that. But if there is some way that we can have them register their property with us and they give us a maintenance plan, then at least we can go into that and look. I mean, I think the only problem that I see with this administratively is that it would be hard to keep track of all of it. But if it's on file, at least we have an idea. And it would be
Got
hard
anybody who
to,
can write a relational database?
yeah,
Not a spreadsheet, but
Yeah.
this calls for something relational.
right. So I just wanted to give you guys an idea of what this was about and why I'm bringing it forward.
So now if you had this ordinance and a need for a database like you just described, would that be kept on paper and files rather than on computers?
Well, we do a lot of things by paper. I would like to get away from that, but that's hard to do in government. It's hard to get away from paper.
That might be a good starting point.
The
Property that's
attraction of
abandoned.
it too is that
Vacant.
if you have to send periodic notices to people, once you have a contact, you can do those by merges. Like you can just have the form letter and it spits their name and address into it and you print it out. It might really make things go easier. And as things change,
Yeah.
you have to know where the one-to-one relationships are and the one-to-many, that you may have one owner who has 3 properties, and then that one owner just exists in the owner's table, and then you have separate properties tables, and you just connect them all. It's a little bit of a pain to build, but once you get it built, it's kind of nice.
There's some software that we can purchase, that
Mhm.
if I budget for it, that helps us with all sorts of things. Planning and zoning wise, code enforcement wise, and
Yeah.
it may have a vacant property type
Yeah, that
tab
would be
too,
helpful.
so, yeah.
Dwellings, no vacant land.
It mainly, I think what they mainly do is just buildings and dwellings, not vacant land.
Yeah, so the examples we looked at were Silver City, Tucumcari, Willits, California, Santa Clara, that's near Silver City.
Yeah,
I think that was it. And some of them did a good job, some of them shot
Yeah.
themselves in the foot.
right,
It was interesting.
yes.
San Francisco, too, was another one.
Yeah, the presentation that we saw, they said that it really helped their town a lot, in enforcement wise. So, and I've had a few places call me up and I didn't know what they meant. They're like, gave me an address and they'd say, have they registered as a vacant property? No. What are you talking about? I'd never heard that before. So then when we learned about it at the infrastructure conference, I was like, oh, that makes sense. So.
Are some of these properties up for sale for taxes? I mean, who's paying the taxes on the
I
property?
would tell you that the majority are not for sale. They are just empty. They're just abandoned.
Yeah.
People just up and just move and just
But it-
never do anything with their property.
But the taxes on it, I mean, I know that we,
We've checked on taxes on a few of them, and a lot of them are not up to date, have not been paid for years.
so isn't there a certain timeline that they go
There's-
up for auction, or they
Yes,
go?
they're supposed to be. I don't know where Santa Fe County is with any of that, or if they advertise it, or what
Well,
happens,
that's,
but,
that's why some of the important things that came from the reading in our packets was, if it's somebody, the owner is not local, or somebody moves away, they have to appoint a local agent.
right.
You need somebody local to be in control of it, to be responsible for it. San Francisco made the mistake of regulating vacant property unless it was on the second floor. Then it was okay. So they had a dilapidated first floor area with an apartment above it, and the whole thing, you couldn't shut it down because the upper floor was occupied. There's a building out on Dinkle, if you're heading toward Moriarty, outside of Edgewood. It's a barn or something that collapsed years ago. It's laying on the south side of Dinkle. I had a friend interested in acquiring some barn wood for a project, and we discovered the owner is in Montana and doesn't want anybody going near that because it's full of snakes. But the two neighbors, one across the road and one next door, have no authority to do anything except tell everyone to stay away from there. I don't know if that'll ever get cleaned up. That's an extreme example,
Yeah.
but, one of the things that was in our reading too that was kind of good, and I referenced it tonight, was increasing fees for extensions. Like you register your abandoned property, you pay $100. The next time you register it, you pay $300. The third time you register it, you pay $1,300. So now it's like, geez, maybe I better get that cleaned
Yeah.
up.
Or
'Cause I'm
sold
bleeding
off
money.
or something.
Yeah, or sold. Or
Yeah, and what I worried about was, how do you track sales, or does somebody sell it to their second cousin for $1? You know what I mean? That,
Put it in a different-
does ownership and responsibility start to wiggle around?
Yeah, they said that one of the biggest thing was the administrative portion
Yeah, it
of it, that
sounded
it's
like it.
really hard to keep up.
Yep.
So you've discovered another new part of your job.
I clearly don't have enough to do.
That's right.
Well, when I talked about database, part of where that's coming from is, when I worked for a program at UNM that dealt with drug-exposed infants in families that were often still actively drug using, we were delivering preventive medical care to their kids, and they were hard to track. That people changed address constantly.
Yeah.
They would have an address, then they'd move back in with a parent or a grandparent, then they'd be out on their own again. So every time they presented in clinic, the question was always, are you still living at such and such? Oh, no, I'm over here now.
Yeah.
And we would enter them all. So I had the person's name, their kids, and a whole listing of their addresses
Yeah.
in separate tables. So you could always choose which contact information was primary. Like, this is now the active one. All those others are stored. So if they move back in with grandma, that one's now the active one.
Yeah.
So we were able to find them. I mean, it was a very similar kind of dynamic.
Yeah.
It was something that wiggled around and didn't want to be nailed down.
Now, are we more concerned with lots with structures on them, or just?
Yes. Yeah,
'cause
dwellings and commercial
There's a lot
buildings.
of speculators that'll buy 10 acres out here thinking maybe somewhere down the road
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
or something, and you don't want to find those people
Uh-uh.
No,
every
no.
year. So it would be
Yeah, just anything
just
with
abandoned.
dwelling or
Well,
commercial building, yeah.
Oh,
But
okay.
people with undeveloped land, they still are paying their taxes.
Yeah,
They still get a tax bill every year.
yep.
I do.
What about,
Yeah,
what
and some
about,
aren't. I mean, some aren't paying their taxes.
What about
Hello.
rentals?
Well, that's what I was going to say. One of my nephews bought a house, they moved from San Francisco to Florida, and they bought a house there, and then they purchased another house that was nearby. I don't know if it's behind them or not, but they worked on it, fixed it up, and it was going to be an Airbnb, but a gentleman that was, had an accounting business or whatever, wanted to rent it out. And, I mean, that's is there an offer to some of these, vacant owners? I don't know what condition that, the property's in or the structure, but if it could be offered to be, if they would be willing to rent it.
Well, I think that's up to them. I think the only thing we're concerned of is if it's going to be vacant for an extended period of time, what is your plan with that?
Right.
And the communication is, if you decide to rent it out, let us know. We'll take you off the list.
Right.
Yeah.
Should it be boarded up? Is it a problem with rodent infestation?
Right. So,
Risk of fire?
That's
in
what we have
Silver
to
City where
decide.
everything
Yeah.
shares a wall?
if we are going to require them to board it up, to keep people out from, because they're just, the one property that is one of our worst ones over on Range Road, I drove by it the other day, and they've pulled the mattress out onto the front porch now. I mean, there's broken windows. They've just been having a heyday in there. I don't know how they're going in, though. It's so.
The place next door to me was in default, and the owner was in her 90s, and she eventually passed away. So it was now owned by a bank, and the management company's not allowed to tell you what bank. And that building was gutted. The wood stove was stolen out of it, all of the appliances, everything just disappeared out the back garage door.
Yeah. Yeah, so, I think it just, I think it gives the neighbors that are around these abandoned properties a little sense of security,
Yeah,
that they're
good
managed by
idea.
somebody, that there's somebody that they can
Yeah.
call the town and say, hey, whoever is managing this property, let them know
Right.
there's been activity there.
well, if you decide to do a database, the best databases start on a whiteboard. Don't jump on the computer and start programming.
Yeah.
Make a map of,
Yeah.
owners, addresses, whatever you think you're gonna need, and arrows that indicate what goes where, and then you get a sense of where you're making mistakes.
Yeah. So that's all I had on that. I just wanted to introduce it and
Yeah,
we'll dig deeper.
The sign ordinance, our current one, has abandoned sign restrictions, too.
Yes.
And I think these two things can dovetail.
Mhm.
We put
Yeah.
the same time limit
Right.
on stuff.
Yeah.
Anything else on that?
No.
You gonna start writing, or you want us to?
Yeah, I'm going to start picking
All right,
it apart, and I'll bring something in the next time.
sounds good.
I got a question. Would there be a difference between a vacant commercial building and a vacant residential? Are they going to have separate rules for the two types?
We'd have to look into that and see. see if there would be. I think they'd probably pretty much be the same, but boarding up a commercial property, if you've got, neighboring businesses, isn't something that you want the town to look at and have it look like, because then we just look abandoned
Yeah.
altogether. So I think there's probably going to be some differences for rules.
Yeah. And, we're maybe in a unique position. If you compare us to like Silver City,
Mhm.
we're not quite like that.
Right,
We don't have a historic downtown district like they do.
yeah,
And their residential stuff is far-flung up in the hills around the college and stuff.
yeah.
And the best residential example is probably the slow-motion demolition that took place here that was, what was it, like Church and 344 on the west side of 344? There was an abandoned building, and it took years to figure out who owned it and what was going to happen with it.
Oh, the
And
old
people were
post
taking
office?
parts.
I don't know.
Was the old post office?
No, this was a residence. But people, while it was abandoned, people were just taking parts of it. I mean, parts, like, first it was a door, and then it was this, and then it was that. Then it was pieces of the roof decking, and then gradually, I think the town, you probably have records of it somewhere, the town did have it demolished, but I call it slow motion because it took like 3 years. If you could do like stop-action photographs, it just gradually fell back into the dirt.
Yeah,
But it took a long time, and a lot of it was tracking down whose it was.
Gosh, I don't remember that.
And there was no consequence for not acting on it.
yeah.
It was in the owner's favor to just leave it alone.
Cleaned up for free.
Yep. All righty then. Should we move on?
Yes.
And I'll start reading those again and outlining stuff on that.
Whoops.
Public comment. Linda has commented already.
Yeah.
I saw another member of the public walk in, but she left again. Matters from commissioners, I've got nothing.
Nothing
How
here.
about the rest of you?
I just have a question on what's happening with Church Road. I mean, it's got the flags, the property, the fence got moved back like 30 feet or whatever. It's probably in the worst shape it's been in a long time with the washboard, because I guess they're waiting to work on it.
Yeah, it's too cold to pave.
So it's going to be that through the winter then? It'll just,
I'm not sure what the maintenance on it will be. Carla can better answer that when she comes back in, but I just know that it's too cold to pave.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I figured, yeah. Yeah, it's like I go down Tony's Road now. I call it Tony's Road.
Yeah.
Maple or whatever it is.
Mm.
Because it's
Yeah,
just,
if it's
you're
going down
going
to
like,
20,
trying to
that's
dodge the
pretty
the
Yeah.
washboard so bad.
Not during the daytime, but at night.
At night, yeah.
And the dust is really bad too.
Yeah.
No gravel no whatsoever on there.
I'm not sure. So we can ask Carla when she comes back in.
Okay, and that's all I mean, I haven't noticed anything else.
That brings us to item 10, matters from staff.
I just want to remind you that tomorrow night, the comp plan is on for a discussion item. It's basically being introduced to the town council as a finished product.
To the city council?
Mm-hmm. To see if they have any changes. The word out there is there could possibly be some negativity about it. So, if you want to come to help speak on the committee's behalf, and also to address why our workshop wasn't recorded, that would be great. So,
Are there particular portions of it that are being questioned, or?
I don't know. I don't know.
Do they meet at 6?
6:30.
6:30, okay.
And we are before public comment. So,
So Tanya, so here's the land use plan, and then there's the the master plan, section 16. I
So
mean,
no, it's the comprehensive land use plan, the one that we
Right.
passed and
This-
recommended to town council last meeting?
Right, okay.
That's the one,
Right, so they have this one.
yes.
Can you tell me how long they've had it in their hands?
Since Friday.
Okay. Enough time to read it. Good.
Honestly, I think what is going to be brought up is a section of the goals and objectives that was already passed by resolution. So that needs to be, I'm hoping Maida, after speaking to her today and giving her a heads up, I let her know that that's probably what's going to be hit on, is something that was already passed. So I pulled the minutes from both the goals and objectives resolution and the action strategies to prove that everything was fine.
Did anything jump out where
Action
approval of the goals
strategies?
was not unanimous?
Everything was unanimous on goals and objectives. Action strategies was not unanimous. It was
Okay.
not unanimous by one.
By one?
Yeah.
Any particular strategy?
It had to do with water utility.
Sure, yeah.
As expected.
Okay,
However, it's still passed. I
okay.
don't understand why we would revisit it again.
I'm not interested in having us revisit it again.
Well, we can't. By
No.
contract, we have to be done by January.
I guess I would say if it comes to it and they want to take that strategy out, take it out. Or if you want to reword it, write a sentence.
I don't know how that would work when we've already passed it by resolution.
Hmm. Well, as the old saying goes, not my pig, not my farm.
Agreed.
They could vote to
Water, yeah.
reevaluate it.
They can rewrite it. I mean, I wrote that little piece on the fire stations. It was real quick and dirty, and somebody went and got a picture. If they decide they want to rewrite a strategy, you know, I hope it wouldn't cost us extra to have Maida realign the
It
thing when
won't
they
cost
rewrite the strategy.
extra unless we go past our contract date, and then it's going to. It's going to cost us more money.
Yeah, so what they should do is just rewrite what they don't like.
The comment that I would make is it worth the heartache? Right? Like, if something needs to be reworded.
Depends on who you are and what your issue is.
No, but I know, but I'm just saying, there's division building, and right now, that worries me as a resident and as, you know, someone who looks out for the businesses. So maybe some of it is worth looking at, just saying, is there a purpose behind what was written? Or is there an unintended perspective on what was written, and maybe the wording just needs to be tweaked or something like that, so that the bulk of it doesn't get ripped apart, so that if we can fix something that someone has an issue with, and make people happy, and it doesn't hurt the goal as overall, do it, it's worth it, you know? Let's take another situation for personal opinion, not the
So would they have, like, a strategy or a recommendation? Is it on page 37? Is that what, I mean?
I don't have any specifics. This is my gut telling me what's up.
Yeah.
And alls I know is I have to defend the reason that we didn't record our workshops.
Well, as I recall it, the 2008 plan talked about a 40-year water plan. And we never developed a 40-year water plan. We nibbled around the edges of it. And I was telling Commissioner Lee, the one thing we toyed with that jumps out in my mind was, now that we had a wastewater plant running, would it be feasible to inject water into the aquifer? Because you can get paid to do it. And it might ultimately be good, long range, to do it. And it proved to be too expensive, so end of discussion. This time around, we intentionally steered away from having a 40-year water plan. We also steered away from much that had to do with water, describing only that we would, you know, continue to study the resources we have and what we think we're going to need as we grow. And I think Maida probably described the existing water companies that serve us.
Mhm.
And that's it.
It's not, I mean, it's not anything alarming, but
So to me, I don't know how you can live in a desert community and take the word water out of your comprehensive plan everywhere it occurs.
Very true.
I think for the most part, though, the general gist of what we have. There's a general enough to make it go all different ways. And so that gives the town leeway to do or not do. You say develop a
Right.
water plan, that's pretty specific,
Right.
right?
It was intentionally written to be malleable and give the town the option to do or not do. That's the point.
and I don't think that that's a bad thing.
2008.
I think that a municipality should always have options, and especially when you've got developers looking at your comp plan to know does this town have their crap together? Do I
Sure.
want to develop here? What's the issue? What do they want in this town? And where am I going to get hung up on? So I don't think that anything that's worded in there is anything sneaky. I don't think anything is something that needs to be decoded. But
No,
I
we-
think what we have is a great document that has already been passed for goals and objectives and action strategies by resolution, almost unanimously twice.
Right,
I just think that we're going backwards
right.
if we allow individuals to continue to trip us at the finish line. There's been plenty of opportunity, and the majority of those people have sat in these workshops. And they should have got up at goals and objectives and said something then, and it shouldn't have been unanimous if there was a big problem on
Yeah, the
both of
only
those
piece of this
things.
plan that the council hasn't seen yet, that they're going to see tomorrow, well, they saw it beginning Friday, is the demographics, the meat of it.
Yes,
How
it's
is the town
great.
changing?
It's
It's fascinating.
beautiful.
It is. The graphics are really interesting. I thought it was a really nice
Well, it helps
job.
build a case towards the objectives.
Let me ask you
Those are
this.
tied together pretty nicely.
When did we discuss, or when did we send action strategies forward for approval?
June 19th,
That was a long time ago.
yes,
When did we send goals and objectives forward for approval?
February.
February.
20th.
Yeah, there's been loads of time to
And
revisit
I
that.
have the minutes.
And I
there
guess
was
what
no
I would
discussion.
say in the end is, if they want it fixed, it's not that hard to fix, go ahead and fix it. The 2008 comprehensive plan, I didn't just sign it, as the gentleman who came into our last meeting for public comment pointed out to me. I was a big part of writing it. Back then, the council wrote it. P and Z did not write it for us. This time, we were commissioned not as a government entity to develop the plan. Our commission was a steering committee to bring the community together and help Mr. Cog craft a plan with input from the community and some coordination from us. That's a big part of why meetings were not recorded. These were not workshops. These were not, P and Z meetings. Will you tell the ghost to stop turning the lights on?
That's on a timer.
And we have the survey, which is
Yes.
what, a lot of what made a,
Oh, yeah, it's all
Based
key to the
everything
survey.
on-
This-
yeah.
It's inappropriate to,
It is, and it
To
just,
back
it's
up,
political, and it
because you
makes
have
me
a
mad
political
because so
ballywick.
much work went into it, and I wish people would quit making everything political. This is something this town needs, is a comp plan, an updated comp plan. We are trying so hard to get economic development here, and it is hard when you don't have an updated comp plan with demographics and things like that. We need this to pass, because right now, we've got a lot of things on the table
Yeah.
that's just waiting for this comp plan to get passed.
To go forward.
Yes,
Yeah.
and when you've got developers waiting for things, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Time
Right.
is money.
Yeah.
It's, and it really, it doesn't,
If it's a minor thing that can just be tweaked to satisfy people, do it. Just get it done and move forward.
I don't know if I've seen a lot of minor things lately.
I'm just so tired.
I'm just saying.
And some of the
Ourselves
personalities,
up Because we are so invested in something that it's like, do opinion, is where change makes somebody happy, as long as it doesn't take away from the essence of what you're trying.
But I think the problem is some of those personalities are focused on one little thing and not anything about the impact to the overall plan.
And I think that's everybody. Everybody takes a piece of of something.
They fall on their sword too often.
It also tracks from the old plan. You can't go 10 years or 11 years with one comprehensive plan in front of you, fail to redo it in mid-cycle, which you should have, revisit it and go, this time, because there's controversy about the issue of water, we're just not going to mention water.
Oh, God,
The idea is to have a certain amount of continuity, where the new plan is a revision of the old plan. It's not a brand-new invention.
It's a vision. It's supposed to be a
that's a good
vision
point.
going forward.
It is.
not
It's a
stuck in
visionary
cement.
statement.
Yeah, it's not a
It's not
in cement.
a legally binding document.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I totally get that, and and part of it is, its only real value is that vision, and to say, this is what the community wants, this is the direction or directions that the community wants us to go, these are the things we want to do. And so theoretically, that is the council, decision-making
but-
process. Okay?
Well, if water's the issue, I would say, just write something that sounds better than what's in there, and I would caution against saying nothing. I don't think you can, it's not good for the town
But
to
some
just
people
leave a
think-
big blank there.
Some people think it's good politics to wait to the last minute and try to screw up the progress with nitpicking stupid things. I'm
To
sorry
get-
to
to
say,
get
it.
it-
I hope that's not recorded, but
To get it to push through, so that they'll hurry up and they'll
Yeah.
change it. and push it through.
the amount of work done on that thing stands on its own.
Yep, I agree. I think it's perfect.
I mean, I'm not
For
gonna say it's
50 bucks
perfect.
a month.
But if it's got water in there, that makes me happy, because water and sewage are still going to be, 50
They're
years from
key.
now, a
They are
big
key.
problem here.
It's not going away.
I'd go further. I can't believe anyone would want to have it be a partisan statement in that plan.
Yeah.
That's the last thing you want. I would keep it as kind of flexible as I could, which is what we struggle to do.
General, yeah.
I thought that it was written carefully to not make it political.
I think that there were tracks of this for the most part.
Are-
Very careful with
What, what did the,
the fact that it's trying to be a general vision.
Yeah.
keep in mind too,
Particular jurisdiction.
the survey responses in that specific area were pretty split.
They were.
And that's exactly why.
So that's
we
why it
tried
was
to
written the way
not-
it was.
Yeah, that's why we tried to not go very deeply into
Yep.
it, to just acknowledge the fact that we need to be mindful of water resources and be always searching for how we're going to do this. Because we know that our aquifer is sinking by a certain amount every year. What is the latest estimate, was like 6 feet?
Yeah, it is a foot a year. Yeah.
Yeah, most of the use is agricultural, not residential, but it's going to limit what we can do. We know all that. So we just have to be mindful of it and explore what we're going to do.
So does that mean we should limit agriculture?
No, not at
No,
all.
I'm just saying, like, depends how you look at that.
No, it means we should look at ways to do it more efficiently, like if you can phase out flood irrigation, do it.
Oddly enough, it's not a bad, I think Clovis is paying their agricultural people not to water.
Mm,
I think people have gone that far to say.
yeah, I believe it.
We'll pay you not to water.
Mm-hmm.
That's just industrial operation in general, not Edgewood.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
And this has been done, we let go for a long time, 10 years or whatever it was, or?
Yeah, since
So it
2008.
can be revisited again in
In 5.
5
It's
years.
supposed to be 5.
yeah, it should be, yeah.
That's what it should be.
I was surprised to find that nobody did it.
I was shocked when I was moving back and I was going to the town website, pulling stuff up, and I'm like, why is this old conference?
I know.
And I found out it was like, because that's the one that's still in place. I was like, oh my God.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep.
And the water
has changed since then.
Okay, well,
That's it.
as I mentioned to you, I have a serious dental appointment tomorrow, but
Good
maybe
luck.
that'll help. It'll make me unable to speak.
Somebody needs to make me unable to speak.
You want to see if my dentist has an opening? You can.
I probably should go.
So that brings us to the next, to the, I love this word, to the penultimate item on our agenda, calendar update. We've kind of gone over it. Next P and Z is December 10th, yay. We have a lot line vacation to consider. And then we have our 2 discussion items again, right? That doesn't sound too bad.
Okay.
Anything else?
Nope.
So with that, motion to adjourn, please.
I move, we adjourn.
Is there a second?
I second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, we're adjourned.